Good morning, everybody. Captain Al speaking. I can never figure out why that plays twice, but it does. Welcome to the course familiarization for the FTD PC FS for the 747-400 and the 747-8. We'd like to wish you all a happy holiday season. And hard to believe it's already the end of 2022, and all the best of health and happiness to all of you in 2023, which is right around the corner. I'd like to welcome Antonio, who's in the room. And we've got Sid Ahmed from Algeria. In fact, I have a International Space Station monitor set up, a dedicated monitor to monitor the space station. As it comes over my neck of the woods, it will alert me to that, and I can go out on a clear night and see it. You can see it with unaided eye, depending on how far it is above the horizon. But many times it flies over Algeria, I notice. And on a clear day, you can really see a lot of Algeria, which is pretty cool. Anyhow, welcome, Sid. And we got Kelly here as well. I think Kelly's from the USA. And we've got Steve as well. So good morning to Steve, everybody that I know that's in the room anyway. And today we're going to be taking a look at the course familiarization. We did one of these a couple weeks ago. And the course will begin on January 2nd. We've done some live streams, or what I like to call jet streams, in the past. And they have been about the course details, so I've covered most of the course details. We've got 9 people so far signed up for Patreon. Which is what I expected. I expected about 9 or 10 was my estimate. And a couple of them are in the room today, so welcome to my Patreon members. And let's take a look, before we get started, let's take a look at the poll. And I'm going to end that poll in 5, 4, 3, 2, 1. And we'll take a look at who our audience is for today. It kind of varies from all the jet streams that I've done. Sometimes it's more aviation enthusiasts, sometimes it's more real-world pilots, and sometimes it's more flight simmer or virtual pilots. And today, it's more flight simmers and virtual pilots. We have 71%. Real-world pilots, we have 28%. And aviation enthusiasts, we have nobody today, 0%. So thank you for taking that poll. What we're going to cover today, let me make sure the stream picks up here. Stand by. Yeah, the stream seems a little slow. I think you're all seeing this now. The course familiarization that we're going to be going over today is the Discord familiarization, because normally the Discord will be the main point of focus as far as course materials go, and questions to get answered, and class interaction will all be through Discord. And then we'll look at some of the course materials that you have available to you if you're in the cruise captain or the full captain Patreon member. And then we'll look at the course manuals that I provide for you for the course. And then we'll look at a digital study guide construction. That's another study aid that I provide for you that you can construct if you choose to. And then we'll look at a normal procedures introduction in preparation for the course, which the briefing starts on January 2nd, and then the following week will be the flight training device portion of it. And then at the end, we'll take any questions that you have. Let me ask you first, anybody get any buffering? Are you getting me okay? I've got some warnings here that the stream isn't as good as it usually is. It usually says excellent on here. Now it's kind of saying poor. So if anybody can let me know in the chat, are you picking this up okay or not okay? Oh, okay. Sid says okay. Good. Thank you. All right. It's saying it's a poor status, and I usually see excellent here. But that kind of probably comes and goes. So let me know if there is any problem. Just put something in the chat, and I'll look from time to time to make sure that I'm still coming through. I'm always paranoid I'm not coming through, that nobody's really hearing me. Not used to this technology yet of a live stream. Okay, when you join the course with Patreon, and again, I will mention that you do not need to be a Patreon member in order to view the live stream that I'm going to be providing for this course. All my videos since 2017 have been free videos, and this is no different. It's a free live stream. So you will be able to attend the live stream for free if you choose to, but it won't be recorded. It's only going to be recorded for Patreon members. And to be a Patreon member will enhance the experience of being a Patreon member because it provides more interaction and the course materials, which will really give you the full benefit of being able to fly the profile yourself, since we're not there to do it together. When you join Patreon, this is what you'll see. You'll have a 3 tabs, a home tab, an about tab, and a membership tab. And when you go to the membership tab, you'll see that your membership that you've signed up for will be there. In this case, it's full captain. And I should mention that so far it's all full captains in the Patreon course that we have. Of the 9 people that we have, they're all full captains. And you'll notice at the bottom of the page is where you can connect to Discord. And that's how you connect to Discord. It's a one-time connection. And then when you put in your ID or whatever, however you're going to be noticed on Discord, then you'll be able to log into Discord anytime. So it's only a one time that you have to connect. Discord looks like this. We'll take a look at the Discord server in a minute for SSFT. But there is you may have multiple servers. If you're used to Discord, you may have multiple servers that you visit. But there'll be the SSFT, the Subsonic Flight Training server icon. And then when you click that, that will take you into the Discord channels. And then there's multiple channels that you'll be able to access in Discord. There's also going to be a content chat area that you'll be able to chat and also get materials or whatever the channel purpose is in Discord. And then on the right side will be the full channel members. In this case, you can see it was just me at the time. Let me try to get to Discord and take a look at it. Stand by. I'm going to open up Discord and hopefully we can see it. Not yet, though. Stand by. Well, so far no luck. Let me see, hang on. No, that's not it. There should be a drop down here for this. I might not be able to get Discord. Hang on a second. Nope. Doesn't look like I can get on I can show Discord for some reason. I don't know what the problem is here. I should be able to show it on the screen, but it's not showing up. So let me go back to the PowerPoint. Okay, sorry about that. I thought I could show Discord, and it seemed to work when I did it on my own, but now it's not working. So anyhow, that's what Discord consists of, and it will have various channels. You can see them on the under the channel here. It'll have a course materials channel, a full captain, cruise captain, first officer channel, hangar talk, autopilot, flight instruments, FMS systems, and I think I added one for airmanship because Antonio had a question, and that question came under airmanship, so I added a channel for airmanship. And then there's systems and full captain recordings. The full captain recordings is where the special bonus videos that captains get once per month will show up in that channel, full captain recordings. And then all the recorded jet streams will show up for any of the members. Patreon members will be able to view the recorded jet streams or live streams. And then there is a Boeing news that is a list of what's happening with Boeing and all the various airplanes that Boeing has. Comes from the Simple Flying website. And then student videos, if you choose to participate in those, your student videos, when you upload them, will be the link to unlisted YouTube video will be there under student videos. You can see right now that under content and chat, it's in the course materials channel. And in that channel, you'll see that there's these are some of the course materials that can be downloaded. They're in PDF format, so they're very easy to download and then open on your own and print them out. We're also going to look at some of the course materials today, and I think I should be able to pull that up, hopefully, in that not screw that up. So let me get that up. And let's see, go. Okay, this one I should be able to show you. So we're going to take a look at some of the course materials that we have. And the first one that's up there is the lesson overview and the lesson objectives for each lesson. And I happen to be showing you lesson number 5 in this case. And this happens to be the overview page of lesson 5. And then there will be a page for the objectives of the lesson as well. And the best thing to do is probably print these out per lesson so you have them handy to follow as we're doing the lesson. And then the idea is that you can take that and put it in your own flight simulator and fly that lesson on your own, and maybe even upload part of it to the student video section if you choose to do that. That's completely optional. Then we have the, in the absence of having a real flight plan, we have the lesson flight plan. And each lesson will have a lesson flight plan. In fact, let me go to number 5 here just to show you that. Since we're kind of using 5 as the demo point here. So in the absence of having a real flight plan, we have a sheet that will have your route that we're going to use on that lesson, the performance that you're going to use on that lesson, the ATIS weather that will be used, and then a clearance that would be the clearance that we get when at the appropriate point where we call for the clearance, and then that would be the clearance, maybe with some modifications, but generally that'll be the clearance for the lesson. And again, all these course materials are materials that you will get in the Discord, downloadable as a PDF. You'll also have a lesson event syllabus and lesson maps and numbered events. So this happens to be the lesson map. And that's the map for lesson, in this case for lesson 5. And you can see it goes from point A to point B. And the purple line would denote the planned route of flight. And the yellow would indicate a modification from that planned route of flight because of a lesson objective or lesson event that happens at that point. You'll notice that along the route we have a numbered events. In this case, going from number 1 through, looks like 16. And so at that point, approximately at that point along the route, is where a lesson teaching point will take place. And there will be a separate page that will list all the lesson events that occur and what they are. So this shows the visual depiction of it, but then of course we will have the sheet that will show what you're doing at each of those points. And that will be, let's see, that'll be right. And you can see in this case, if I can point out that we're going from point A here, and then we make a modification here, and then we end up back on the route. Another modification here, we end up back on the route. Then the actual route of flight, or the planned route of flight, is this line right here, this purple line. But now we take another modification by going direct to Papa Sierra Charlie. But then we veer off of that as well on 11, 12, 13, 14, and then do the approach. So each of these will have a visual depiction along with the numbered events. And then this would show the numbered events, in this case for lesson 5. At each of those points along the map is where you will see the numbered events listed, what we're going to do. And you can see number 1 would be speed intervention, number 2 would be turn right using heading select off the route, number 3 would be intercept inbound course to melee, and so forth and so on. The objectives start out, and the exercises start out relatively easy, and then they get a little more complex as we go through the FTD portion of the course. Remember, the FTD is designed to, in the real world, get you ready for full flight simulator. So it's mainly procedures oriented. It's mainly approach oriented, setting up approaches, both non-precision and precision, flying those approaches, and then it gets into non-normals. There's actually not as much actual flying, like steep turns, stalls, non-3-engine approaches, 2-engine approaches, things like that are not covered in the FTD. The FTD is designed mainly as part of the ground school in order to get you ready for the full flight simulator, at which point when you get into the full flight simulator you have the necessary skills in order to have the basics down, that we don't have to take the time in the full flight simulator to do those basics. And that's important because full flight simulators cost a lot of money to operate, and you have a very limited time to do the lessons that will then lead to your type rating. Let me go to the next one. Let's see, where are we here? Yeah, let's go there. You'll also have a handout in there for standard callouts, standard SSFT callouts that will incorporate an ILS approach, non-precision approach, normal takeoff, and missed approach. And those are the main callouts that we'll use through the course. We have to have some standards, so these are the standard callouts, and they're a little bit different than the standard Boeing callouts. We're using Boeing procedures throughout the course, but I've modified the callouts a little bit from standard Boeing callouts, and because they make more sense actually. Oops, I don't want that one. There's also a handout on the flow patterns for both the 747-400 and the 747-8. So you will have a handout that looks like this. It's in PDF format again, and it will have block diagrams that will incorporate the standard flows for the 400 and the -8 of what the captain does, what the first officer does, and what joint responsibilities are. And those callouts, or those flow patterns, will also be pretty much listed in the or displayed in the flight crew operations manual as well. But here you've got a handy study guide that you can use for flow patterns. Flow patterns are very important. May not seem like it's that important, but they're actually pretty important because you have to memorize these in order to do particular flows before you do a checklist. And then the checklist, ideally, is supposed to back up the flow pattern. But you will notice with the Boeing checklist that it doesn't back it up fully. The Boeing checklist is kind of a minimal checklist. And many airlines will add to the Boeing checklist in order to get critical items, or what they feel are critical items, to back up that what you did from memory, you can check on the checklist. And so but Boeing takes more of a view that you go by memory quite a bit in flow patterns, and then there's certain things, critical items, that are backed up with a checklist, but they're just that, they're critical items and not everything. So scan flow and flow patterns and your cockpit setup mainly are all done from memory. And that's part of the job of the FTD portion of the training, is to be learning those and repeating those from day one so that they get very well ingrained by day 10. And then when you're evaluated to move on to the full flight, you know exactly what you're going to do when you get in the full flight in terms of how to set up the flight deck and how to start the engines. And you're just not used to the flying stuff yet, but you're used to all the procedural stuff by the time you get in the full flight. Let me go to the next one. Let's see. Let's see if we got something else here. Got anything else? Yeah, there'll also be a handout for the questions and answers. If this is for the full captains, there's a question and answer bank. It happens to be for the 747-8. This is one that I made up for a customer a long time ago. And this happens to be 200 questions. And this is the question bank. And then there's an answer sheet that goes along with it. So if you're studying systems in the FCOM and you want to take that test, you can certainly take that test. It's pretty applicable to the 400 as well, but not everything will be necessarily applicable since it is for the -8. But I included that just as a reference. If you do study systems more on your own, you may want to look that test over. And then we have the manuals. And we have the Flight Crew Operations Manual, or the FCOM, Volume 1 and Volume 2. You're also going to have the Quick Reference Handbook for normal checklist and for all your non-normal procedures. And the only really document we're not including here is that Boeing incorporates, as well as the Flight Crew Training Manual, the FCTM, which is how you fly the plane. And again, in FTD, you don't really concentrate on that. It's not like you're going to taxi the airplane like you would in the full flight. And it's not like you're going to be doing the maneuvers that you would do in the full flight. So the Flight Crew Training Manual is kind of how you fly the airplane by Boeing standards. And then the FCOM, the Flight Crew Operations Manual, is the procedures portion of it and the systems portion of it. So in the FCOM, there is a Volume 1 and a Volume 2. You'll see it here. And the Volume 1 consists of your title page and your preface and your introduction, abbreviations, any revisions, limitations, normal procedures, supplemental procedures, and performance in flight. That's all part of Volume 1. And so when we first start out in the FTD, we really concentrate on Volume 1 because that's where the normal procedures are. In Volume 2, you have all the systems. And so that's where, if you want to know more about the APU, if you want to know more about the electrical system or the fuel system or the air conditioning or pneumatics or hydraulics, you can look in Volume 2. If you want to know more about procedures, then you're going to look into Volume 1. The FCOM is the one thing that is not in the Discord because the file was a little bit too big to send or to put into Discord. So that pretty much when the members of Patreon have joined, I have sent them the FCOM. As soon as they join, I send it to them via email. And then you have the FCOM. The QRH is in there in the Discord. And let's see, and here's the QRH. That's the Quick Reference Handbook. And the Quick Reference Handbook is this is of course a digital copy. The actual QRH is a physical book. It's a binder that is bound by spiral rings. And then you can flip it open, and there's various tabs for the various sections of the QRH. It's important to note there's 4 indexes in the QRH. There's a quick action index that you're looking at here. This has all the items that you need to get to quickly. They may or may not be memory items. Some items are memory items. You would do the memory item first, and then go to the appropriate checklist second. Some of these are not necessarily memory items, but they still require immediate action. So you can find that right on the front of the book that allows you to get to that item quickly. You'll also notice on that page some are in all capital letters and some are in non-capital letters. The ones in capital letters are ICAS messages. So they're messages you get on your alert screen, tells you exactly where to go, and then you can go to the appropriate ICAS message in order to get the procedure that you need to follow to resolve the problem. Some items are non-capital letters, and those are what are called unenunciated items, and those are non-ICAS messages. So not everything, obviously the ICAS can't tell you everything. So there are procedures that we have that may not have an ICAS message associated with it. For example, if you need to dump fuel, well, we know we need to dump fuel, but there's nothing that tells us an ICAS message that says fuel dump, or that tells you need to dump fuel. So when you do the fuel jettison procedure, that would be a unenunciated checklist because it's not enunciated on ICAS. You'll notice some of these are bigger capital letters as well. For example, look at cabin altitude and compare that to, see if I can scroll down here. Is that scrolling down? Yeah, I guess it is. Look at cabin altitude compared to rapid depressurization, compared to smoke, fire, fumes. And you'll see that those are all bigger letters. And they're bigger letters because they figure that when you do those procedures, you're going to be possibly in a lower visibility kind of environment. Like if there is smoke, you may have your smoke goggles on. And so the idea is kind of little as it is that the bigger letters will help you see a little better if you have problems seeing. So that's why you'll see that those are not only bold, but they're bigger capital letters as well. Because those particular items, rapid depressurization, you possibly could have your oxygen mask on with smoke goggles. It all may be one unit, or you may have an oxygen mask and then separate smoke goggles. Cabin altitude, same thing, rapid depressurization, smoke, fire, fumes. Let's see. And you can see even evacuation is bigger, I think. Does that look bigger? Yeah, maybe not. Yeah, I think that is bigger. Because again, you could possibly have an obstruction of vision there. Some of these are memory items and some are not memory items. For example, fire engine 1, 2, 3, 4, that would be a memory item. But something like evacuation is not a memory item. So the quick action index is something that you need to get to quickly, but you may have to do a memory item first and then go to the procedure. Some like evacuation, you would just go to the back cover. You just flip the book over, basically. And on the back cover would be the evacuation checklist, so you can get to it quickly when you need to do it. You'll also notice there's going to be four total indexes. First one we looked at was the Quick Action Index. The next one is the ICAS Message Index. And you'll notice that in the ICAS Message Index, they're all capital letters. And that would indicate that it's an ICAS message. It's going to come up on your alert screen. And we would identify it on the alert screen. And then we could go to this index, because we know it's all ICAS messages. And we can look up in alphabetical order that ICAS message. And then that would tell us which section to go to for that appropriate procedure. You'll notice some of these have carets, a little caret symbol next to it, and some do not. The ones that have carets, it's primarily a crew awareness item. It'll list what it is, what the message means, but there's no procedural steps to take. It's just an awareness item. So if you were to go to that procedure, for example, like altitude alert, and you go to 15.1, it's going to tell you what that means, that altitude alert, but there's nothing that we need to do about it as far as procedures go. There's no step 1, step 2, step 3. The ones that do not have carets are ICAS messages that do have crew procedural steps that you'll need to take in order to carry out the checklist. You notice they're all in alphabetical order. And then the next index down is from there is the unenunciated checklist, or the unenunciated index. You notice these are not all capital letters. They're all smaller font, not caps. And these would be the items that are not represented by an ICAS message, but we still may need to do them if the appropriate condition presents itself. So again, you can see, like if we had to dump fuel, there's a fuel jettison procedure. If we had 2 engines out, there's a 2-engine inoperative procedure. If we can't raise the gear, there's a gear lever will not move up procedure. So these are the things that would be not enunciated by an ICAS message. You might have an airspeed problem where there's no ICAS message associated with it. There may or may not be, where you get an airspeed disagree. However, if there's no ICAS message, but the airspeeds are disagreeing with each other, then you can see that there is an airspeed unreliable message, because we don't have there's an airspeed unreliable procedure because we don't have a ICAS message. So these are what are called the unenunciated checklist items. And again, you can see that they're in alphabetical order as well. And then down from that, the next index that we have is the alphabetical index. And the alphabetical index lists everything. So it'll have unenunciated checklist as well as ICAS messages, as well as careted messages. So everything's in here. So if you're not sure which index to go to, you would always go to the alphabetical index. And then everything is listed in alphabetical order. You can look up the item, and then you can go to the appropriate section of the checklist. Now, the QRH is all tabbed. If you had the actual book, it's all tabbed, so you'll see where the air conditioning is, or electrics, or fuel, or fire. You'll see those sections. But in order to make this a quick reference handbook, you shouldn't go into it via the system. Some people will take the QRH and they'll flip right to a system. Like, I know it's an electrical problem, so I'm going to go to electrical. And then they'll sit there searching for the appropriate checklist in the index. And then maybe it's not an electrical problem. Maybe it's another problem that you actually got it wrong, and it's in another section. So rather than go to the, searching around, and then it becomes a slow reference handbook and not a quick reference handbook, the indexes are there to allow you to get to it quickly. Now, with a digital copy, it's obviously the easy, because we don't have a physical copy. So it's very easy to use the index in a digital copy, because that's where you're going to go. And then all of these are linked, so that if I need to go to altitude alert, for example, and I push that, it'll take me right to the altitude alert caroted message, like you see here. And so it's not a problem when you have a digital copy as far as going to the index for it. That's going to be the primary way, because otherwise you'd be scrolling through everything. But these are all linked, so when you find the appropriate ICAST message or unenunciated checklist, all you have to do is click the link and it takes you there. So that's great. You wish you had that in the airplane. And you kind of do in the Dash 8, because you have an electronic checklist. But in the 747-400, we use a paper checklist. And in the Dash 8, there also is a QRH that is a paper QRH, but it's as a backup in case the electronic checklist fails. So there is a paper QRH in the Dash 8 as well. So for our purposes, you're going to notice that using the QRH is going to be very easy to go to the index and then click on the appropriate message. And so when we have particular problems as we go through the course, you'll be able to take your own QRH and go to the appropriate procedure that we've identified, and that we're carrying out that procedure as we do the FTD lesson. Now, when you get through all the checklists, there's also, or when you get through the indexes, you'll notice there is the normal checklist for Boeing, and that's the checklist we're going to be using. Now, in the course, in the Discord, I've also provided you with an SSFT checklist. The Subsonic flight training checklist is just a checklist that I made up. It's based on the now defunct Northwest Airlines checklist, and I've added to it. So it's kind of I've taken a defunct airline checklist and made it my own, and added some items that I thought should be on it, and then made it an SSFT checklist. So that's just for your reference. We're not going to be using that checklist, but it's just something I added. We are going to be using the Boeing checklist. And you'll notice that it's the PMDG Boeing checklist. And you'll notice that this QRH is a PMDG QRH, and the Flight Crew Operations Manual is a PMDG FCOM. And that's so that it's it's put out by PMDG, that gives you the models for the 747-400 and 747-8. It's one of the better models out there that simulate the airplane. And they will provide you with the Boeing checklist, and they'll provide you with the QRH and the FCOM. I think they still do. I mean, somebody said they didn't provide, that there's one thing they don't provide anymore. I think it was the QRH, maybe, that they didn't provide. But so, in other words, Boeing licensed that to them. It's an old QRH. It's an old FCOM. They licensed it to them to use with their product. It's basically, it's non-proprietary, which means it's not anything that Boeing could get upset with, that it's out there. And most of these things, I've made a lot of effort to make them non-proprietary. So all the slides that you see and all that, they're all made up by me. So none of this is official Boeing documentation, including the course presentation. And that's just so that it all remains Boeing non-proprietary. And if they happen to stumble upon my website and saw this, they wouldn't necessarily take offense to it, because I'm not putting anything out there that's that Boeing would be upset that I'm putting it out there. And with the exception of maybe one thing that I'll point out, and even that I don't think they'd really care, because it's more of a media document than it is something that's proprietary. So I've made every effort to make this non-proprietary so that Boeing won't get upset. And even if they did, I'm retired now, so it doesn't really matter unless they take me to court. But nothing in my course is really all that proprietary. And even though I've modeled the course after the Boeing program, these are all my materials and all my knowledge basically in my head that we're using. In the QRH, you also have, way in the back, you have a maneuver section. The maneuver section is kind of good when you get your QRH to look at it. You can look at the performance in flight. That's all your charts for performance. And then if we get all the way to the end here, let's see where it is. See, this is why it's easier to use an index, because otherwise you're scrolling through an electronic document. Where does this section start? Let's see. Yeah, that's where it starts right here. So there is a maneuver section within the QRH. And some of that will be useful for the course as well, as far as an ILS approach profile or things like that. Some will not be, like rejected takeoff or stalls, or things that are going to be more flight related. But there are some things in here that will be procedures related. So the maneuver section will be something you want to look at. And then there's also a checklist usage discussion right at the end of the QRH. And that, I think, completes the manuals. So let's go back to the PowerPoint. Okay, so we just covered that all these things: the lesson overview, objectives, the lesson flight plans, the event syllabus, the maps and the numbered events, the PMDG Boeing checklist, the SSFT checklist. I didn't show you that, but that's in there for your reference. And the standard callouts, and I don't think I have flow patterns here, but that's in there. And and then of course you're going to have the FCOM that I send to you. And then you're going to have the Quick Reference Handbook, which is part of Discord. Or that's something you can download from Discord. The other one you get email from me. There again is the digital flight deck panel and study guide. We'll talk about that in a minute here. And then you've got the flow pattern block diagrams. We showed you that for the 400 and the -8. And then showed you that question bank. And there is an answer sheet with it as well for those 200 questions when you join Patreon. I'll go through this quickly. This is the flight training device PC simulation study guide for the 747-8. This is the media document I was talking about that kind of could be proprietary, but again, it's more of a PR document. So I listed the digital files in here, and you can download all those digital files, and then you'll have a document that you can put together that would be just like the brochure that you get for real when it's this media document. This would be the front page. Sorry if I cough. This would be the front page of the document. And again, I've added my cover on here instead of the Boeing cover that they had. And then you turn it over, and that's what the back page looks like, dimensions of the airplane. And then this is like a pamphlet brochure. So when you open it, you will have a 747-8 flight deck on the left side. On the right side, you'll have a simulator, a Level D simulator, CAE, with a normal checklist operation discussion there. And this is the same thing, by the way. This normal checklist operation is what is in the QRH. In the back of the QRH, there's a discussion of checklist instructions, and this is in there, just taken from that QRH. If you can't see my pointer. Let's see. Oh, now you can see it. Yeah, so this right here is taken from the QRH, this normal checklist operation. From the back of the QRH, all the way in the back, there's checklist instructions. So this is what the document looks like when you open it. And then if you flip this page up, the one with the simulator on it, it'll now look like this, where you'll have the overhead panel of the Dash 8. And then there'll be a little half sheet here that you'll take that sheet and flip it to the right. And when you do, it'll look like that. And then you'll see a little more of the forward instrument panel. And then when you take this sheet that kind of shows the runway for auto land profile, if you take that sheet and flip it down, it'll look like that. And so now you can see you're getting a 747-8 panel poster, basically, in a brochure. And then if you take that picture of the photo there of the 747-8, flip it over to the left, and then you're going to get the rest of the forward instrument panel. And you'll notice there's some scan flows here as well. I didn't take my thing from here, but they happen to have flow patterns here, as well as my block flow diagrams, which I made up on my own. So these are, you could use these as well for the Dash 8, but in addition to my flow patterns. And then you've got the pre-flight and post-flight scan flow diagram here that's right out of the FCOM, basically. That's on the left side. So this is what it looks like when it's completely unfolded. And again, each one of these is a page, and it's a file that will be in Discord, and you can download it. And then you could put this together as you choose with tape or staples or whatever. You could put it on heavy cardstock. You could do it in color. And you'll have a document that looks something like this. This is what it would look like on the front. That's what it'll look like on the back of the cover. And this is how you'd want to construct it too. And I have a video on how to construct this. It's pretty easy to construct. You see these two pages are upside down in order to make it work. And then you put these together just like it's shown here. Here's the files, and I label them 1F, 2F, 3F, 4F, 5F, and so forth. And that's the front of the guide. And then the back of the guide, the files would be 4B, 3B, 6BB, 5TB. And again, you put these together just as it's shown here, and then tape them, staple them, whatever. And especially if you print them in color, you have a nice little study guide. So that's provided in the materials section of the Discord. This is a video that I put together basically on my desk here that shows, I put it together with, I just put it in black and white instead of color. And then all I did was staple these together. So I kind of did it quick, but you'll see basically what I did and what it should look like. And so you can see that if I take it, the pages are back to back, stapled together. If you open it, there's that 747-8. Open it again, you'll have part of the panel. Open the top, you'll have the 747-8 overhead panel. Take the bottom, flip it down, you have the center pedestal. Then I take that little half sheet and move it over. It's a little different than what I showed you. It's folded up a little bit differently than what it looked like previously. But again, you could fold it up however you really want to. That works. So that's what it looks like fully completed. And then you can see I just flipped that page back. The little half page. Flip the bottom up. Flip the top down. And then I'll close the leaf flap there, so you're back to what looks like a book open, and then you close it. And you'd have a brochure. So that's included in Discord as well. It's a way that you can have a panel poster, basically, you know, because when you go into training centers, you normally will have panel posters, big ones, that are displayed for the 400 and the Dash 8. And that way, when you're giving your briefing, you can, and you need to point to a switch or whatever, you can get up from your seat and point to that switch. And so panel posters are usually a good thing to have. When you first start ground school, you're given a complete set of posters for the 747-400 and the Dash 8 as you go through the differences. So you're given a full set of those posters. So I figured, well, in this course, why not try to give you that as well? So that's something that you can make if you choose to. If you don't choose to, you can just print them out and use them as individual pages as well. It's up to you. Okay, next we're going to look at normal procedures. The normal procedures, this is the normal procedures section of the FCOM, the Flight Crew Operations Manual. And the introduction portion of that is NP, which stands for Normal Procedures, .11, in the FCOM, or the Flight Crew Operations Manual. So there are some normal procedures, philosophy, and assumptions that they want to make clear before you actually start what are the normal procedures. And so the first thing they talk about in that section is to refer to supplemental procedures as procedures that you don't do all the time, and that you don't need to rely on memory to do them. So things like the electrical power-up procedure, it's usually not done. We do it in training, but it's usually not done in real life. Because most of the time, if you're with an airline, you're getting on an airplane that is fully powered up. Somebody did that, you know, or a crew left, you're getting on, you're following the crew. Maintenance brought the airplane from the hangar to the gate, and then they leave and you get on and it's powered up. So it's not very often that you have to do an electrical power-up procedure. But if you have to do it, there's a supplemental section that allows you to go to the FCOM, go to the supplemental section and look it up, and then read and do it. It's not dependent upon memory to do it. Things like adverse weather, we don't have to know from memory everything that you need to do for adverse weather. Like if I can't remember what the run-up is that I need to do on the engines before I take off in icing conditions when it's 3 degrees Celsius or less. I'm not sure what I need to do. You can look it up in the adverse weather section of the supplemental procedures section. The APU is not working, and you need to do a ground pneumatic start. And then after you push back, you need to do a cross bleed start. Gee, I haven't done that in a long time, or I've never done that. Okay, well, you can look it up in the supplemental procedure, and then you can read and do it. So again, these are procedures that may be required, but you don't do them all the time. And so it's not dependent upon your memory to do them. Normal procedures will also assume that all systems operate normally and that you have the full use of all the automated features of the airplane. And the FCOM says that that's LNAV, VNAV, autothrottle, autopilot, and autoland. Now I put an asterisk by autoland because I'm not sure exactly what they mean there. The normal procedures assume that we're going to use all the automated features. So yeah, if we can use LNAV, we're going to use LNAV. We're certainly going to use VNAV in the climb and in cruise and in most of the descent. I'm not going to use manual thrust. I'm going to use the autothrottle. That's part of the automatics. I'm certainly going to use the autopilot at some time after takeoff in order to relieve my workload. But autoland, no, not very often. Most of the time, crews manually land. They don't auto-land. They only auto-land under certain situations, and that would be if we have to, because the airplane requires an auto-land. One hasn't been done in a while, and we need to log an auto-land for the airplane. And in that case, we'd have to, coordinate it with ATC and tell them we'd like to do an auto-land, keep the critical area clear, and it'd be a little bit of a hassle that for ATC sometimes if they're busy that we need to do an auto-land. So we try to pick and choose where we do those if the airplane requires it. But that's one place we do an auto-land. The other places would be if it's required due to low visibility. So if it's if we're below Cat 1 minimums, and it's got to be a Cat 2 approach or a Cat 3 approach, Cat 3A or B, then we would do, usually those procedures call for that it's done by auto-land. We're not manually landing those. Even the Cat 2 for most operators is in auto-land. So really, auto-land is used, but only under certain select situations. Otherwise, we're manually landing. We want to, you want to feel like a pilot, and so at the end of each flight, you are disconnecting the autopilot and manually landing it. But the other ones I fully agree with. We're going to use LNAV, we're going to use VNAV, we're going to use the autothrottle, we're going to use the autopilot. Are we going to use autoland? Maybe, maybe not. Probably not. Normal procedures also assume that you're going to do any coordination with the ground crew. They don't necessarily tell you to do that, but anytime you've got to pressurize a hydraulic system, anytime the airplane's going to be moved, anytime you're going to move a flight control surface movement, especially if it's around a gate area, we're going to have to coordinate that with the ground crew before we take that action. Normal procedures also assume, for purposes of the FCOM, that you are going to adjust your lighting and crew comfort items. That you'll do that. They don't say adjust your lighting, and here's how you do it. Turn this switch, turn that. They don't tell you that. They assume that you're going to adjust your lighting at the appropriate time in order to see things as you do the cockpit setup. And any crew comfort items, like if you were to add foot heaters, for example. They're not gonna. They don't need to tell you to turn that on if you need it. They don't need to tell you how to adjust your seat. They'll tell you at the appropriate time to adjust your seat, but they're not going to tell you how to do that. So they're going to assume that you do those things automatically and that you don't need to be told to do them. Usually the lighting will come after the electrical power-up procedure. So once you establish AC power via the external or APU, then you'll go ahead and probably turn all your lighting up, especially if it's dark. If it's daytime, you probably have enough light to, if the sun is streaming through, there's enough light there to see everything. But if it's a more darkened environment like a simulator or the airplane, where it's dusk or night, you're going to want to turn up all your lighting to see before you start checking things. Hang on, I got to cough for a minute. I'm going to go off for just 1 second to get a sip of water. Okay, sorry, I'm still fighting this virus that I had. When I did this 2 weeks ago, I thought, but at least it'll be better in 2 weeks. No, it's not. It's been with me for forever. So sorry about that if I sound hoarse or coughing. Normal procedures are done by memory. Each pilot, when they get in the airplane, has a scan flow duty to accomplish. The scan flow duties are pronounced by being the captain or the first officer. So there'll be certain first officer duties and there'll be certain captain duties in order to prepare the flight deck. The scan flow sequence may be changed. I put kind of, because we really expect you to do it by the book. And, the idea is that as long as you check everything, doesn't matter what order you go in. Well, yeah, it kind of does, because you want to be taught a way of checking the flight deck thoroughly. And so the way it's written is the way it's taught, and that's usually the way we expect you to do it, so that when you're on, when you're getting a check, whether it's to go on to full flight or to for your type rating, the person giving you the check knows what you're doing. If you were just to start with the center pedestal, for example, he'd probably look at you. Why are you starting down there? That's not the procedure. So, can it be changed? Yeah, kind of. It can kind of be changed. And the reason I say that is because the example I usually give is the thrust quadrant. It goes over from like the parking brake to the reverse thrust levers to the forward thrust levers to the trim. And then it kind of goes back to the fuel control switches, and it's more of a left to right and left to right when you check the thrust quadrant. Well, if you went left to right, but then you kind of snaked around in an S and went right to left, and instead of coming around to the, you come around to the alternate trim switches and the stab trim auto switches and the fuel control switches. So you're making a little bit of a different pattern than what's written. Was that wrong? Not really, because you're checking everything. But if you want to do it by the book, then it's left to right, left to right. If you change it a little bit, are you still checking everything? Yes. Is that wrong? No, not really. So you can kind of change a few things like that, but if it gets to be too out of hand, then it becomes how can I check if I don't know what you're checking? It's that kind of attitude, and so I expect you to do it by the book. So that's the way we look at it. So we don't encourage, a change, but as long as you're checking everything. Now, some people, what you'll see they do is they get in the flight deck and they start on the overhead panel, and they'll just be zipping down the overhead panel. Like their finger will just go down, and like 3 seconds later they're done with the left side. 3 seconds later, they're done with the center. 3 seconds later, they're done with the right side of the overhead panel. Well, have they really checked that overhead panel? Probably not. You need to check every switch and make sure it's in the proper position. And normally people like that, if you see that they're doing things quickly, you'll just start putting switches out of position for the next lesson. And then you'll see very quickly if they're checking it or not. Because you need to go through it very methodically and very organized, and you are checking each switch, each light indication as you go through the system. And that's part of what we'll cover in period 1 of the FTD. But again, the main point is that everything has to be checked. It has to be in the proper position prior to you, doing your pre-flight checklist. General philosophy and assumption is that circuit breakers are never reset or pulled without maintenance approval on the ground or in flight. So if I get on the airplane and I see a breaker that's out, I'm not necessarily going to just push that in. It could be caused by the crew that just got out and he took his flight bag, and especially the first officer, and he kind of clipped maybe a circuit breaker on the right side. The P6 circuit breaker panel is on the right side of the first officer. And sometimes your flight bag, if you're not careful, could clip one of those and open it up. Well, I don't know what that caused, so I can't just push it in. I'm going to give maintenance a call and get them up there and to see if it's something that was tripped or did somebody just inadvertently trip it. Same thing in flight. I can't just arbitrarily troubleshoot myself and say, okay, I'm going to pull this circuit breaker and see if this solves the problem. No, we're not troubleshooters. Unless maintenance tells us to pull a circuit breaker, we're not going to do it. An example of that would be FMCs. Sometimes the FMCs have been known to trip offline. And if you get both FMCs tripping offline, the easiest way to get them back is to pull the circuit breaker and then push them back in. But am I going to do that on my own? No, I have to call maintenance and say we've got a left FMC and a right FMC that are out. And do you recommend pulling circuit breaker to see if they reset? And they're probably going to say, yes, go ahead and do that. Pull the circuit breaker. And that usually solves the problem. So it doesn't happen very often, but there have been known situations where the FMCs do drop offline. And the way to get them back is by pulling the circuit breaker and resetting them. But again, can I do that arbitrarily? No. I have to get permission to do that. Pre-flight and post-flight duties are divided by captain and first officer. So when we set up the flight deck initially, the captain has duties, the first officer has duties. And then the phase of flight duties will be divided between pilot flying and pilot monitoring. So once the airplane is moved for the purposes of flight, for example, if the captain is taxiing, the captain becomes the pilot flying at that point. He's no longer the captain, he's the pilot flying. And the first officer becomes the pilot monitoring. He's no longer the first officer, he's the pilot monitoring at that point for as far as duties go. So once the airplane is stationary on the ground, that's captain and first officer. Once the airplane's moving, it's pilot flying and pilot monitoring. Each crew member is responsible for moving controls and switches in their area of responsibility. Area of responsibility is a concept that Boeing uses in order to that you have certain areas that you're responsible for. And in the FCOM, in Volume 1, under normal procedures, in the introduction, or it might be in the normal procedures section, there will be a scan flow diagram for who does what when you're the captain and when you're the first officer. And then when you're the pilot flying versus the pilot monitoring, what's your area of responsibility now in terms of what are you responsible for? And the checklist usage goes by area of responsibility. So if it's in my area of responsibility, I'm going to respond to that on the checklist. So we'll be talking more about that area of responsibility when we get into FTD number 1. An example of that is the fuel control switches when you're at the gate and the airplane's not moving. The fuel control switches are the domain of the captain. He's the guy that checks the thrust quadrant, and he's the guy or gal that checks the fuel control switches. And that's his area of responsibility. So when it comes to starting the engines, the captain's going to start the engines. The fuel control switches are his. But once the airplane moves, the fuel control switches actually go to the pilot monitoring. That's his area of responsibility. So if we're in flight and we have an engine fire, the thrust levers would be the pilot flying's responsibility. So he'll bring back the thrust lever, appropriate thrust lever that is has the fire, with confirmation from the pilot monitoring. But then when it comes to the fuel control switch, the pilot monitoring is the one that's going to bring back or cut off the fuel control switch to cut off, with confirmation from the pilot flying. So the things in your area of responsibility, you're responsible for basically, as far as moving those switches. And then there's joint items that both crew members can be responsible for. And you'll see when you look at the FCOM that there's diagrams of that for captain and first officer during your pre-flight and post-flight duties. And then there's also pilot flying and pilot monitoring. When the captain is the pilot flying, the first officer could be the pilot flying if he's taxiing the airplane, which some airlines allow the first officer to taxi. He'd be the pilot flying at that point. And maybe it's his legs, so he'll be the pilot flying when he takes off. And the captain will be the pilot monitoring. You'll see there's different diagrams for whether the captain or the first officer is the pilot flying or the pilot monitoring. And again, those pre-flight and post-flight scan flows, which certainly my Patreon members can look up, and their FCOM would be in the normal procedure section 11.5, and that would show a diagram for the captain and the first officer items. And then you'll see the area of responsibility if the captain is the pilot flying, or if the captain is taxiing, then he is considered the pilot flying. And so in that case, the captain would have certain items that he would do as pilot, he would be responsible for as pilot flying. And then the first officer would have items that he or she is responsible for as pilot monitoring. And then there's joint responsibility items. So you'll see there's a diagram for that, who's responsible for what, graphically displayed. Or if the first officer is the pilot flying, or if the first officer is taxiing, then there'll be, again, there's captain items, there's first officer items, and there's joint items. The captain, he'd be the pilot monitoring, the first officer would be the pilot flying. And then there's a diagram for that visually depicts who's responsible for what in that phase of flight. The captain may direct actions outside of the crew member's area of responsibility. So, it's always captain's discretion that he or she can direct action, that maybe it's a switch that's not in your area of responsibility, or that maybe is in your area of responsibility, but you don't want to do it at this time. So an example of that would be you take off and you have an engine fire shortly after liftoff with severe damage. The airplane's shaking like a son of a gun, You get to 400 feet, and you're going to carry out the memory item. And in this case, the captain, as the pilot flying, he would be the one to initiate the fire procedure and bring the thrust lever back to idle with confirmation from the pilot monitoring. But in this case, because the airplane's shaking so hard, he wants to keep his hands on the control column and he wants to keep flying, so he may direct the first officer to bring back the appropriate thrust lever. And again, they'll both verify it before the first officer does that it is safe for him to retard the thrust lever. But in that case, the first officer may be bringing back the thrust lever, and he is not the pilot flying, but the captain directed him to do that because he's got his hands full. That would be an example of where the captain can direct actions outside of the crew member's area of responsibility. So again, phase of flight responsibilities come into play when we taxi. When the jet moves, you change from captain to pilot flying, or you could change from first officer to pilot monitoring. Or if the jet moves and the first officer is flying, then the first officer would become the pilot flying and the captain would become the pilot monitoring. But anytime the jet moves, now our responsibilities are for flight path and airspeed control, aircraft configuration, and navigation, and that would be the pilot flying responsibilities. So his main job is to keep the airplane flying and be very situationally aware of what the airplane's doing, its flight path, its airspeed, its configuration, and be navigating. The pilot monitoring, whoever that is, they're responsible for operating checklists, communications, tasks that are assigned by the pilot flying, and being the all-important monitoring and cross-checker. It's a two-pilot airplane, so you need, you basically need 4 eyeballs looking in the flight deck to make sure that things are going as they should, and to speak up when they're not. So the pilot monitoring isn't just there to kind of sit and relax and read the paper. The pilot flying is there to assist and monitor and cross-check. The mode control panel operation is normally the pilot flying's responsibility. The pilot flying is the one that will be responsible for that. And the pilot monitoring will verify anything that is done on the mode control panel. But if the autopilot is engaged, then the pilot flying will set the mode control panel, and the pilot monitoring will verify what the pilot flying set. If you're hand flying the airplane as the pilot flying, then you're going to clearly command what you want on the mode control panel, and the pilot monitoring will set what you want on the mode control panel, and both will verify. This is one thing that I mentioned a couple of weeks ago too. Same thing. It's something that some pilots get into a very bad habit of flying and reaching up and setting things on the mode control panel when you're hand flying, and that's not the way the airplane is meant to be flown. Not to mention you're trying to do 2 things at one time, which is fly the airplane, and you're also trying to set a heading or set an altitude or change a pitch mode or whatever. It's not a good practice at all. And so I tend to really get on guys when I see them do that in the simulator, or if you see them doing it on a line, same thing. You have to be able to clearly command what you want on the mode control panel when you're hand flying. And usually the people that do that are not good at verbalizing what they want on the mode control panel, and that's why they're reaching up and doing it themselves. So it's important to kind of clearly state what you want and the pilot monitoring will give what you want if you command it. So you may say you get a clearance down to 3,000, set 3,000, give me flight level change, speed 220. That's a clear command. Pilot monitoring does it. Pilot flying verifies that he did it. And, again, if autopilot's engaged, it's my panel. It's my MCP. But the other guy has to verify what I did on that MCP, so both need to verify. CDU operation before taxi, the captain or the first officer can make CDU entries. Usually somebody is going to input the information in the CDU during the pre-flight. The other pilot is going to check it. That could be the captain or the first officer, it depends. So most of the time it's the pilot flying that will input the information into the CDU, and the pilot monitoring, or who's expected to be the pilot monitoring, would be the guy to check it, or girl to check it. When I say guy, I mean gal too. There's a lot of women pilots today, so a lot of times I'll say guy, but I mean crew. The pilot flying will normally perform the CDU pre-flight. It doesn't have to be that way, but again, it could be discussed and who's going to do that, but normally it's the pilot flying. And then the pilot monitor will verify that everything has been, the cockpit setup has been complete. The pre-flight for the CDU has been complete. Training, we usually do it where the pilot flying puts it in. That's normally how we do it in training. During taxi, as soon as the airplane moves, we try to keep the CDU entries completely verboten. We don't want to be entering into the CDU while we're taxiing, because that means one head is down. He's out of the loop. You're not looking where we're going. You're not looking what could be a potential conflict, a potential hot spot, a potential of taking a wrong taxiway, and maybe if the other guy was looking, he would have caught it and said something. So generally, the entries are not made into the CDU while we're taxiing. If we need to make something into the CDU, we're going to wait till we're stopped. And then at that point, the pilot monitoring will normally make the entry, and the pilot flying will verify. During flight above 10,000 feet, let's take below 10,000 feet first. Below 10,000 feet, we try to keep CDU entries to a minimum. Again, most things you can do up on the mode control panel, and that's more heads up. So most of the time we will say to limit the CDU entries. We can still do it below 10,000, but they should be limited. Again, I don't want a guy heads down for a long period of time as we're below 10,000 feet, because it's busy. And we need everybody to be heads up and outside. Above 10,000 feet, you get into the point where the pilot monitoring will normally make the entries into the CDU. And then the pilot flying will verify those entries. The pilot flying may make simple CDU entries. And what that means is usually on the VNAV climb page. If he wanted to set a speed in there, he could probably do it, because he's pilot flying. That's kind of his page when you're above 10,000 feet, the VNAV climb page. So, he or she could certainly do that, or they could command the pilot monitoring to do it. You'll notice I put in parentheses airline. Well, some airlines allow the pilot flying to be the person that does the CDU entries above 10,000 feet as well. That's not the Boeing philosophy, and there's not too many airlines that do it that way. It can be done that way, above 10,000 feet, that the pilot flying does CDU stuff, but we like the fact that with Boeing that the pilot monitoring is less busy than the pilot flying is. The pilot flying is responsible for the aviating, the navigating, all that stuff. The pilot monitoring should be the one to put any kind of route modification in, because it could be an involved route modification. And now you don't want the pilot flying heads down and he's screwing up and he's trying to figure out why, and he's not flying the airplane anymore. So there are cases where some airlines will allow the pilot flying to make the CDU entries above 10,000 feet, but that's not the norm. The norm is that the pilot monitoring will make the CDU entries above 10,000 feet, and the pilot flying will verify before execution. As part of the autopilot flight director system, the crew must always monitor the course, the vertical path, and the speed. You got to know where the airplane's going, what it's doing in the climb or descent, and are we at a healthy speed. Whenever we set the mode control panel, we want to verify the value changes on the PFD or the ND as well. And that's all in magenta. If you look at the PFD, you'll notice that whenever you change speed or heading or altitude, they all change and they're magenta on the primary flight display. So when we change the MCP, we just want to verify that that changes on the PFD as well, and or the ND. We also verify all changes on the FMA, the flight mode enunciations. So you have auto throttle for on the extreme left side. This is above the PFD, the FMA. You'll have auto throttle on the left, a roll mode in the center, and pitch mode on the right. And then below that will be the the autopilot flight director system mode. So it'll be command, or if you're hand flying the airplane, it'll say FD for flight director. And so any change that we have in FMA, we want to verify that change. Announcing the change on the PFD, the flight mode enunciation, is good CRM practice, is what Boeing says. The pilot monitoring is usually the person that will call out the change, and the pilot flying will verify it. That's normally how it's done. So the pilot monitoring may say thrust ref VNAV speed, and the pilot flying will say check. You both verified the change. It's a good way to learn the FMAs. And so generally we feel that announcing the FMA changes are beneficial. Some airlines don't necessarily enforce that you need to call out FMA changes, but they will tell you you have to both verify the FMA changes. But in most cases, it's good to call it out. And then the pilot flying usually can then check and say check. We just verify that that's the correct FMAs that we want at this time. Now, sometimes that can slip a little bit if you're busy. You're in a descent, you're on a star arrival, it's busy, ATC barking instructions, and you're listening to get a view of what the traffic situation is and an awareness of what's going on. And so, there may be cases where we don't call out FMAs, and that's okay. An occasional FMA that's not called out is fine, as long as you're both checking that the changes on the FMAs. But it can get very busy sometimes that you're not. You could miss one or two, and that's okay. But we should be looking. Your eyes get very used to looking at the FMAs for information. And I can tell you as an instructor and as a check airman and as an FAA examiner that when I see that when I sense that something's wrong and a crew is starting to get a little antsy and discuss something, the first place my eyes will go is the FMAs. I'll look at what the airplane's doing in thrust, what it's doing in roll, and what it's doing in pitch. And I can usually tell from that what the problem is. Or maybe the problem is like they thought the autopilot's engaged, but it's not. It's an FD. And, maybe the first officer says, how come you're going off your heading? Or something like that. And then I'll look right away at the FMA and see that, he thinks he's on autopilot. And it's the autopilot got knocked off and he doesn't realize it. So that's the first place my eyes will go is the FMAs. They're very important to notice all the time what your FMAs are and if there's any change. So for the people that are going to attend my FTD PCFS course for period 1, the homework, if you choose or choose not to accept it, would be these items that are covered in period 1. And that would be the electrical power up and power down procedure. And I list the supplemental procedure section there, 6.1 and 6.2. These are all under normal procedure. Well, this is supplemental procedures. But then everything else is under normal procedures. So we would have our preliminary pre-flight procedure, or PPP. That'd be under NP 21.1. And then the CDU pre-flight procedure, 21.2. And then how the first officer sets up the flight deck with his scan flow duties, 21.9. How the captain sets up his side of the cockpit or flight deck with his scan flow duties, 21.19. And then engine start procedures, 21.29. And then to review the following flow patterns, the before start procedure, which is we sometimes call flow patterns procedures. So the before start procedure would be 21.24. The before taxi procedure be 21.32. Your lineup with the runway procedures would be 21.33 and 34. Your after landing procedure, 21.55. Shutdown procedure, 21.56. And secure procedure, 21.59. And again, usually these flow patterns are followed by a checklist. So the before start procedure or flow would be followed by the before start checklist. The before taxi procedure or flow would be followed by the not the after start checklist. What's Boeing call it? The before taxi checklist. And then your lineup procedures would be let's see, there is no checklist for that. That's just a procedure. The after landing procedure is just that. It's a procedure. There's no checklist for it. That's an area where Boeing actually I never understood that quite well, because you have an after landing procedure that you accomplish by flow pattern, but there's no after landing checklist. And a lot of airlines will change that. And I think the Boeing philosophy is you're pretty busy after landing. And you have certain things that, mainly the FO, does a lot of things with the after landing procedure, but there is no after landing checklist. And I think the assumption is that you're taxiing at that point. You just came from a flight mode, now you're into ground mode. You've cleared a taxiway, you're starting to taxi, and your attention needs to be really focused on taxiing and going in the right direction to the gate. So I think the procedure with Boeing is more or less that there's nothing that critical that could happen if you forget something. So it's a procedure, it's a flow pattern, but there's no checklist backup to it. And whereas a lot of airlines will say, oh no, we need to add an after landing checklist if we're going to be doing this after landing procedure. And they, and I kind of agree with that, but you get used to doing it the Boeing way, and the Boeing way is that it's a procedure, but there's no checklist. There's no after landing checklist. And then there's a shutdown procedure followed by a shutdown checklist, and then a securing procedure followed by a secure checklist. So most of these will be followed by a checklist. So if you want to prepare for FTD1, we'll be talking about these items in the briefing, and we'll be doing them in the period, in the full flight. FTD, flight training device. So the first briefing for the FTD PCFS course will be on Monday, January 2nd at 12 noon, 11 Central. That'll be the briefing. And then followed in the next week by the actual FTD session, which will be Monday, January 9th at 12 noon, 11 Central. And then the following week will be period 2 brief on January 16th at 12 noon Eastern or 11 Central. And then the FTD2 flight will be the following week, January 23rd at 12 noon or 11 Central. And again, that's the way the concept goes, is that there's 2 briefings and 2 FTDs per month for 6 months. And this gives you, this does give you time to prepare or practice or, fly or whatever in between in order to get ready for the next lesson. Now, the times I know may work out for some people and may not work out for other people. I had to basically schedule this around what I do. And so this is the time that works out best for me. But some people, if you're in Europe, maybe in the evening, and that may be good, that you could attend the live stream, or the jet stream as I like to call it. But if you can't attend it, then they will be recorded if you're a Patreon member. So if you're not a Patreon member, they're not going to be recorded and won't be online. But if you are, they'll be in the recorded section of the Discord. It's not, we'll mention that in a minute. There also is a full captain bonus video will be released the 15th of each month. And that's the video that will be on a system or a non-normal procedure. And I'll kind of alternate them, so during the 6 months, maybe 3 of them will be systems related and 3 of them will be non-normal procedures related. And the idea is that after 6 months, I repeat the course for those that want to attend it. Again, all briefings and flights are recorded for Patreon members. There's no disadvantage whatsoever if you do not attend the live. You can always watch the recorded session. You can also always ask questions in Discord. If you go to Discord now, if you're a Patreon member, you'll notice that there's several discussions between myself and Antonio. Antonio had great questions. And so there's already some questions and answers in the Discord. And Antonio, thank you for all your questions that you've asked. He's asked some very insightful questions, actually. You can ask questions in Discord. Again, you can ask questions live as well. That'll be in the chat. But if you then think of a question, you can always do it in Discord. And then the link to the YouTube unlisted video will be in the Discord recorded Jetstreams channel. So I will record these, and then after they're recorded, they'll be put on Discord, but not released to the general public. Again, the general public who are not Patreon members can attend the live stream at the appropriate time. That's why it's free. It is free. The Patreon only enhances the experience, that's all. And if you're not sure what that is, you can go to my Patreon channel. I think I have it here at the end. And you can check out a 41-minute video that explains the course in more detail than I'm doing here. I had a month where I did these live streams explaining the course and what it is and what it entails and what you get and things like that. So that'll be on the Patreon page if you're not sure what the course entails and if you're like new here listening to me. And it's a very reasonable price, by the way. This isn't expensive to attend. The Full Captain bonus monthly videos will be in the Discord Full Captain Recordings channel. Those are the ones that are released the 15th of every month. And there's the link for the Patreon. Patreon.com/subsonic flight training. Patreon.com/subsonic flight training. And that will explain Patreon membership. It explains the levels, the first officer level, the cruise captain level, the full captain level, and then it also lists the price, which I think are like $3 for the first officer level per month. And let's see, the cruise captain is $8 per month, and then the full captain is $10 per month. And again, that includes all the materials and things like that to enhance the experience, basically. So I kept it at $10 or less, basically, which is really reasonable for the training and materials and all that stuff that you're getting. So again, patreon.com/subsonic flight training. And there it is again. Okay, that's all I have for today, unless you have any questions. And this will be the last, this is the last Jetstream live stream prior to the course start, which starts in January. So I've kind of advertised it, for the last couple of months, and, I don't have that much of a reach, I don't think. So people that are interested will find this. And again, the course isn't necessarily for everybody, because some people just want to, fly the airplane and have fun, and they don't care about procedures. But some people that are a little more interested in airline type training, this is probably right up their alley. So before I let you go, does anybody have any questions? Or maybe you're all still not here because I probably droned on too long. Any questions before I sign off? And if you think of a question, by the way, after I sign off, just put it in the chat box there. And I keep it up for at least an hour afterwards in case somebody has any questions. Okay, so I thank you all for coming, and I look forward to the first period. And all my Patreon members, thanks for attending today. And we hope to see you at FTD 1 on January 2nd. And again, Merry Christmas and Happy New Year to everybody. All the best in 2023. Captain Al, out. Thank you.